What you are about to hear is a work of fiction. The people, places, and events depicted in this story are products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual individuals, living or deceased, or to real situations is purely coincidental. These stories may explore themes of crime, injustice, and human suffering. While fictional, they reflect real emotions and difficult truths that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
Robert Caldwell, yes, I know your real name, I told him, and his eyes went wide. You made one critical miscalculation. You underestimated me. Before we go on, consider subscribing to the channel to be notified as new stories are published. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know just how far our stories reach. My name is Jennifer Matthews, and I'm 35 years old. If you saw me driving my reliable Honda sedan to work each morning or grabbing coffee at the local cafe, you'd probably think I was just another professional woman making her way in the world. You wouldn't guess that I inherited over $150 million when my parents died in a car accident 8 years ago. That's because I've always believed in living modestly, finding fulfillment through my work, rather than flaunting wealth I never asked for. I run a successful architectural firm with my business partner David Thompson, who's been with me since our college days at architectural school. We met during our first-year studio class, both struggling with the same impossible structural engineering assignment. David was the one who figured out the solution, but instead of keeping it to himself, he stayed up all night helping me understand the concepts so I could complete my own version. That's just who David is. Generous, patient, brilliant in his quiet way. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was to so many things about David over the years. The way he'd always remember that I liked my coffee with just a splash of cream and no sugar. How he'd stay late to help with projects without being asked, never making it seem like a burden. The careful way he'd listen when I talked about my dreams for the firm, asking thoughtful questions that helped me clarify my own vision. I thought it was just friendship and professional partnership, but I see now there were signs of something deeper that I completely missed. 6 months ago, I married Robert Sterling after meeting him at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital. He was everything I thought I wanted, charming without being flashy, successful as a financial consultant, and he seemed to share my values about living modestly despite having money. I think people who flaunt their wealth are missing the point, he'd said over dinner on our second date. True satisfaction comes from meaningful work and genuine relationships, not from showing off. I fell for those words completely. When Robert moved into my home after our wedding, I felt like I'd finally found the companionship I'd been missing. My house had felt too quiet since my parents died, too empty despite its comfortable rooms and carefully chosen furnishings. Robert filled that space with conversation and laughter, with someone to share morning coffee and evening walks. I trusted him with more aspects of my life, including some financial information, because isn't that what marriage is supposed to be about? Partnership, trust, building something together? David was polite to Robert whenever they met, but I noticed a certain reserve in his manner that wasn't typical of his usual warmth. When I asked him about it once, David just shrugged and said, "I'm sure he's fine, Jennifer. I just want to make sure you're happy." At the time, I attributed his coolness to the natural awkwardness of adjusting to my new marriage. I thought maybe David felt displaced as my closest friend and confidant. I never imagined he might be seeing something I was missing. The week before I left for the architecture convention, I was particularly excited about the trip. I'd been looking forward to this collaboration for months. There was a renowned architect named William Harrison scheduled to present on sustainable urban design on the final day, and I'd managed to schedule a meeting with him afterward to discuss a potential project partnership. This was exactly the kind of innovative work I wanted our firm to be known for, the kind of project that could make a real difference in how people live and work in urban environments. As I prepared for the trip, I felt genuinely happy. My career was thriving, I was content in my new marriage, and I was optimistic about new professional opportunities. But if I'm being completely honest, there had been some things that bothered me before I left, little moments that created a nagging unease I tried to push away. Robert had been asking more probing questions about my accounts lately, casual inquiries that felt slightly off. "How do you keep track of all your investments, darling?" Or, "Have you ever considered diversifying into international markets?" I know some excellent contacts who specialize in offshore opportunities. When I'd give vague responses, he'd push just a little harder, always with that charming smile that had first attracted me to him. He'd also started disappearing for hours at a time without clear explanations. "Just meeting with some clients," he'd say, or running errands for the business. But when I'd ask follow-up questions about his work, his answers were often inconsistent or oddly evasive. Once, I called his office looking for him and was told he wasn't scheduled to be in that day, even though he'd told me that morning he had back-to-back client meetings. The night before I left for the convention, Robert seemed unusually interested in my travel schedule. "So, you'll be gone the full week?" he asked, looking up from his laptop where he'd been typing furiously. "No chance you might cut it short if the meetings go well?" "I doubt it," I replied, folding clothes into my suitcase. "The main presentation I want to see isn't until Friday, and my meeting with Harrison is scheduled for afterward. Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," he said quickly, that charming smile appearing again. "I'll just miss you, that's all. Maybe I'll use the time to catch up on some work projects I've been putting off." Something about his tone made me look at him more closely, but he'd already turned back to his laptop, fingers flying over the keys. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was natural for him to want to know my schedule. We were married, after all. Married couples shared these details. I flew out the next morning with Robert's kiss still warm on my cheek, and his promise to call me every evening. The convention was being held in Chicago, and I'd booked a room at a classic downtown hotel that felt like a perfect blend of elegance and professional atmosphere. As my plane lifted off, I felt that familiar thrill of anticipation that came with new opportunities and the potential for meaningful work. The first day of the convention exceeded my expectations. The presentations were innovative and thought-provoking, covering everything from green building technologies to community-centered design principles. I attended sessions on sustainable materials, urban planning challenges, and the intersection of architecture and social justice. Each session sparked new ideas, new possibilities for what our firm could accomplish. But it was on the second day that everything changed in the most unexpected way. I was grabbing coffee between sessions when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see William Harrison himself walking toward me with a warm smile, accompanied by a woman I recognized as another architect from the convention materials. "Jennifer Matthews, right?" he said, extending his hand. "I'm William Harrison. Claire here mentioned she knows your work and thought we should meet before my presentation on Friday." I was stunned. This was the meeting I'd been hoping for, happening 3 days early and in the most casual, natural way possible. "Mr. Harrison, what a wonderful surprise." "I was very much looking forward to your presentation and our scheduled meeting afterward." "Please, call me William," he said. "Why don't we grab a table and chat now? I'd love to hear about your vision for sustainable urban projects." The next 2 hours flew by as we discussed our shared passion for architecture that serves communities rather than just showcasing design. William's approach to sustainable development aligned perfectly with my own philosophy, and when he mentioned an upcoming mixed-use project in Portland that needed exactly the kind of expertise our firm offered, I felt a surge of professional excitement I hadn't experienced in years. "I think we could create something truly special together," William said as our impromptu meeting drew to a close. "Your portfolio shows exactly the kind of innovative thinking this project needs. Would you be interested in partnering with my firm on this?" "Absolutely," I replied, trying to contain my enthusiasm. "This is exactly the kind of work I've been hoping to do." "Excellent." I'll have my team send you the preliminary specs and timeline next week. We can handle all the details remotely. No need for you to stay for the rest of the convention unless you want to. Walking back to my hotel room that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd accomplished my main goal for the trip much earlier than expected, and the opportunity was even better than I'd hoped. Missing Robert and excited to share my good news, I made an impulsive decision. Why wait until Saturday to go home? I could surprise him by showing up 3 nights early, maybe cook his favorite dinner and celebrate this incredible opportunity together. I called the airline and managed to change my flight to that evening. As I packed my suitcase, I imagined Robert's face when I walked through the door. He'd be so proud of me, so excited about this new direction for the firm. Maybe we could even take a long weekend together to celebrate, something we hadn't done since our honeymoon. The flight home felt shorter than usual, my excitement carrying me through the journey. By the time I pulled into our driveway at 8:30 that evening, I was practically bouncing with anticipation. The house was dark except for a light in Robert's study, which made me smile. He was probably working late, which meant he'd be even more surprised by my early return. I let myself in quietly, dropping my suitcase by the front door and walking toward the study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the faint sound of typing. I was about to call out his name when I realized the house felt different somehow. Too quiet, too still. The typing had stopped. "Robert?" I called softly, pushing the study door open wider. The room was empty, though his laptop was open on the desk, screen still glowing. He must have stepped out briefly, maybe to the kitchen or bathroom. I decided to leave him a note about my early return, something romantic and playful that would make him smile when he found it. Moving to his desk, I pulled out a piece of his personalized stationery and began writing, "Surprise! Your wife is home early with incredible news to share." That's when I noticed something odd. A length of silk rope was dangling from one of the desk drawers, dark blue against the rich wood finish. It seemed so unlike Robert to be untidy, especially in his study where he kept everything meticulously organized. Without thinking, I opened the drawer to tuck the rope inside properly. But when I saw what the rope was tied around, my heart stopped. The rope was binding a small, dark blue velvet bag, the kind jewelry stores use for expensive pieces, but something about its weight and shape told me it wasn't jewelry. My hands trembling slightly, I untied the silk rope and opened the bag. Inside were documents, multiple identification cards, all bearing Robert's photograph, but with completely different names. Robert Sterling, yes, but also Robert Caldwell, Robert Morrison, Robert Hayes, driver's licenses from different states, each with convincing-looking addresses and details. And underneath the licenses, 2 passports, both with Robert's photo, but one listing him as Robert Caldwell from Toronto, Canada, and another identifying him as Robert Morrison from Manchester, England. My legs gave out, and I sank into Robert's desk chair, staring at the documents spread before me. This wasn't some innocent explanation waiting to happen. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or old documents he'd forgotten about. This was deliberate, systematic, and terrifying. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was Robert not who he claimed to be? Was our entire marriage built on lies? What did he plan to do with these false identities? And most frighteningly, what did this mean for me? Fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm me, I forced myself to think clearly. Whatever this was, whatever Robert was planning, I needed evidence. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and began taking photographs of each document, making sure to capture every detail clearly. The fake driver's licenses, the passports, even the velvet bag and silk rope. Then, forcing myself to move slowly and carefully, I placed each document back exactly where I'd found it. The licenses in the same order, the passports positioned precisely as they'd been, the velvet bag tied with the silk rope and placed back in the drawer with just the end of the rope dangling outside. Exactly as I'd found it. I stood up, my legs still unsteady, and looked around the study one more time, Everything appeared normal, unchanged. If Robert returned, he'd have no way of knowing I'd been there or what I'd discovered. Grabbing my purse, I left the study and walked quickly to the front door where I'd left my suitcase. I picked it up and left the house, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't leave a note, didn't turn on any lights, didn't give any indication that I'd been home at all. Driving away from my own house felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. I found myself checking the rear-view mirror constantly, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't stay there, not until I understood what I'd stumbled into. I needed help, but who could I trust? My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I tell them? That my husband had fake identification? For all I knew, there might be legitimate reasons for the documents, though I couldn't imagine what they might be. No, I needed someone who knew me, someone whose judgment I trusted completely. I needed David. Without really thinking about it, I found myself driving toward his house, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to process what I'd discovered. David lived in a modest craftsman-style home about 15 minutes from my neighborhood, a place I'd visited countless times for business meetings and casual dinners, but never in circumstances like these. I parked in his driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the photographs on my phone. In the harsh glow of the streetlight, the fake documents looked even more ominous. Then I gathered my courage and walked to his front door. My knock was probably too loud for the quiet residential street, but I heard David's footsteps immediately. When he opened the door, he took one look at my face and stepped aside without question. "Jennifer? What's wrong? You look terrified. I thought you weren't coming back until Friday." "David," I said, my voice shaking as I stepped into his familiar living room. "Something's happened and I don't know who else to call." I showed him the photographs on my phone, watching his expression change from confusion to serious concern as he scrolled through the images. When he looked up at me, his eyes were grave. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "this is not something you can handle alone. These aren't old documents or some innocent mistake. This is deliberate identity fraud." Hearing him confirm my worst fears should have made me feel worse, but instead I felt oddly relieved. I wasn't overreacting. This was as serious as I'd feared. "What do I do?" I asked, sinking into his comfortable armchair. "I don't even know who my husband really islanded." David pulled out his phone. "First we're calling your attorney, then we're getting you professional help, a private investigation firm that specializes in this kind of thing. And until we know what we're dealing with, you're not going back to that house alone." Margaret Chen, my attorney, arrived at David's house within an hour, followed shortly by Thomas Wright from Apex Security and Investigations, a firm Margaret had worked with before. Both of them examined the photographs with the kind of professional detachment I envied, gathered around David's dining room table while he made coffee for everyone. "Mrs. Matthews," Thomas said, looking up from my phone, "these documents suggest your husband may not be who he claims to be. We need to verify his real identity and determine if you're in any immediate danger." "Danger?" The word sent a chill through me. People who maintain multiple false identities usually have reasons that go beyond simple privacy, he explained. "Given your financial status, we need to consider the possibility that you've been targeted specifically." Margaret leaned forward. "Jennifer, I know this is overwhelming, but we need you to think carefully. Has Robert shown unusual interest in your finances? Asked questions about your accounts, your investments, your legal documents?" The questions I'd been dismissing as normal marital conversations suddenly took on a sinister cast. "Yes," I said slowly. "He's been asking more questions lately about how I manage my investments. He suggested I diversify through contacts he knows, and he was very interested in how long I'd be away on this trip." Thomas and Margaret exchanged glances. "We're going to start a comprehensive background check on Robert Sterling immediately," Thomas said. "But first, we need to buy some time." If Robert expects you to be away until Friday, we recommend you call him and extend your trip even further. Tell him the project negotiations are taking longer than expected. The idea of lying to Robert, of pretending everything was normal, made my stomach turn, but I could see the logic in their advice. If Robert was planning something, I needed time to understand what it was and how to protect myself. "I'll call him," I said. "What should I tell him?" Margaret suggested the script. Instead of my project partnership wrapping up early as it actually had, I should say the negotiations were more complex than expected and I needed several more days to finalize everything. I dialed Robert's number, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when he answered. "Darling, how's the convention going?" "It's been incredible," I said, and that part was true. But there's been a development with the Harrison project. Instead of everything moving quickly like I hoped, it turns out the partnership agreement is much more complex than we initially discussed. "Oh," Robert said, and I could hear something shift in his tone. Well, these things happen in business, don't they? The good news is that William, Mr. Harrison, thinks we can work everything out, but it's going to take several more days of meetings and negotiations. I might not be home until Tuesday or Wednesday." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "That's wonderful news about the project, Jennifer. Take all the time you need. I want you to get this right." What chilled me was the unmistakable note of satisfaction in his voice. He was pleased that I'd be away longer. That reaction confirmed every suspicion Thomas and Margaret had raised. "I'll call you tomorrow night with another update," I said. "Perfect. I love you, darling." "Love you too," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. After I hung up, Thomas was already on his laptop, fingers flying over the keys. "We'll start with basic background verification, employment history, education, previous addresses. If Robert Sterling is a false identity, it usually doesn't take long to find the cracks in the story." "What should I do while you're investigating?" I asked. "Stay safe," Margaret said firmly. "Keep your location confidential, pay for everything in cash, and don't access any shared accounts or email addresses. If Robert is planning something financial, we don't want to give him any additional information about your whereabouts or activities." David, who had been quietly listening to everything, finally spoke. "Jennifer, you're not going through this alone. Whatever you need, somewhere to stay, someone to drive you around, help dealing with all of this, I'm here." As if to demonstrate his point, he stood up and said, "Let me get your luggage from your car so you don't have to go back outside." It was such a small gesture, but in that moment of fear and uncertainty, David's immediate instinct to take care of practical details while ensuring my safety meant everything to me. Looking at him there in his comfortable living room, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. David wasn't asking questions about why I'd trusted Robert or how I'd missed the warning signs. He wasn't making this about him or his feelings. He was simply offering unwavering support, the same way he'd been doing for years without me fully appreciating it. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more deeply than he could know. The next few days passed in a blur of staying in David's guest room, phone calls, and slowly unraveling revelations. I stayed at his house for safety, and he gave me space to process everything while remaining close enough to offer support whenever I needed it. Thomas and his team worked with frightening efficiency, peeling back the layers of Robert Sterling's identity like forensic archaeologists uncovering ancient lies. By Friday morning, the day the convention was supposed to end originally, Thomas had devastating news to share. "Robert Sterling doesn't exist," he said, spreading files across David's dining room table. "The social security number he's been using belongs to a man who died in infancy in 1987. The employment history he gave you references companies that either don't exist or have no record of him working there." He pulled out a photograph and placed it in front of me. It was clearly Robert, but the man in the picture looked different somehow, harder, colder than the charming man I'd married. His real name is Robert Caldwell, Thomas continued. He's 38 years old, originally from Detroit, and he has a criminal history dating back 15 years. We've been able to document 2 previous marriage fraud cases, and there's currently an outstanding warrant for his arrest in connection with one of them. The room seemed to tilt around me. Marriage fraud? Margaret opened another file. Jennifer, Robert Caldwell has done this before. We can document 2 previous cases where he targeted successful women with substantial assets, gained their trust through marriage or long-term relationships, then systematically attempted to steal their money before disappearing. The outstanding warrant means law enforcement has been looking for him. But we have a prenup, I said weakly. He can't just take my money. Thomas shook his head grimly. The prenup protects your assets in divorce, but it doesn't protect you from fraud. Look at this. He showed me photocopies of documents that made my blood run cold. Power of attorney forms with my name on them, but not in my handwriting. Bank transfer authorizations I'd never signed. Investment account applications for offshore funds I'd never heard of. He's been forging your signature, Margaret explained. These documents would give him complete control over your assets. If he'd succeeded in getting them filed with the appropriate institutions, he could have drained your accounts and disappeared before you even knew what happened. I stared at the forged signatures, each one a violation of trust so profound I could barely process it. How did he get samples of my handwriting to copy? Probably from documents around your house, Thomas said. Shopping lists, notes, anything with your signature or handwriting. People rarely think to protect those kinds of everyday papers. David, who had been quietly reviewing the files, looked up with a grim expression. There's more, isn't there? Thomas nodded. Robert hasn't been working alone. He has a partner, a woman named Patricia Whitman. She's been his accomplice in the previous fraud cases. They work as a team. Robert handles the romantic manipulation and document forgery, while Patricia manages the financial aspects and provides alibis. He showed me surveillance photographs that his team had taken over the past few days. Robert meeting with a blonde woman in her early 40s, the 2 of them sitting close together in restaurant booths, walking hand in hand through a park, embracing in the parking lot of a downtown hotel. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt almost detached from it, as if we were discussing characters in a movie rather than my actual life. The man I'd married, the man I'd shared a bed with for 6 months, was not only a criminal but was in love with someone else. Our entire marriage had been performance, art, every tender moment, a lie designed to steal my inheritance. What happens now? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Now we make sure they both pay for what they've done, Margaret said with fierce satisfaction. Thomas has been coordinating with federal law enforcement. Marriage fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, Robert and Patricia are looking at serious federal charges. Thomas leaned forward. But we need to be strategic about how we handle the arrest. If we move too quickly, they might try to destroy evidence or flee. We want to catch them in the act, with all their planning documented. What does that mean for me? It means we set a trap, he said. You're going to go home, and you're going to let Robert think his plan is working. We'll have agents monitoring everything, recording devices in place, and when Robert makes his move with the forged documents, we'll have everything we need to put both him and Patricia away for a very long time. The thought of facing Robert, of pretending I didn't know what he was, made my stomach clench with anxiety, but underneath the fear was something else, a cold, hard anger that surprised me with its intensity. I want to do it, I said. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes his scheme has failed. David reached over and took my hand. Are you sure? This is going to be incredibly difficult. I squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his steady presence. I'm sure. Robert Caldwell made one critical error. He underestimated me. He thought I was just another wealthy woman too naive to see through his lies. He's about to learn how wrong he was. The next few days were spent in careful preparation. Thomas's team installed hidden cameras and recording devices throughout my house, focusing on areas where Robert was likely to conduct his final fraud attempts. Federal agents were positioned in surveillance vehicles around the neighborhood. Margaret prepared all the legal documents necessary to immediately freeze any accounts Robert might try to access. Most importantly, David arranged to take time off from our firm so he could be available whenever I needed support. "I'm not letting you go through this alone," he said firmly when I protested that he shouldn't disrupt his work schedule for my problems. "This isn't just your problem," he continued. "You're my business partner, my closest friend, and Jennifer, you mean more to me than I think you realize. If you're in danger, if someone has hurt you, then it matters to me personally." There was something in his voice, a depth of feeling that made me look at him more closely. For just a moment, I saw past the professional facade David always maintained, glimpsed something deeper and more tender than simple friendship. "David," I started to say, but he shook his head. "Not now," he said gently. "Right now, the only thing that matters is keeping you safe and making sure Robert faces consequences for what he's done. Everything else can wait." But I found myself thinking about David's words as we made the final preparations for my return home. Had I been blind to his feelings the same way I'd been blind to Robert's deception? Were there signs I'd missed, moments I'd misinterpreted as simple friendship when they meant something more? Wednesday evening, exactly a week after I'd first discovered the fake documents, I drove home to confront my husband. David and 2 bodyguards from Thomas's firm, both built like football players and trained in personal protection, followed in a separate car, parking at the end of my street where they'd be close enough to respond quickly if needed. The house looked exactly the same as it had the night I'd fled, but now it felt like enemy territory. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage, then pulled out my phone to call Robert. "Darling," he answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you're finally coming home. I've missed you terribly." "I'm actually just pulling into the driveway," I said, watching the lights come on in his study as he moved to the window. "The project is finally locked down. I can't wait to tell you all about it." "Wonderful! I'll open a bottle of wine to celebrate." "Actually, Robert, I have something important I want to discuss with you about our future together. Could you come home right away?" There was the briefest pause. "Of course, my love, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and sent a text to David. "He's coming. 20 minutes. His response was immediate. "We're ready. You've got this." I let myself into the house and walked deliberately to the dining room, turning on all the lights and pulling out a chair at the head of the table. On the table, I arranged printed copies of all the evidence Thomas had gathered, the photographs of the fake documents, surveillance photos of Robert and Patricia together, copies of the forged financial documents, and a complete dossier of Robert Caldwell's criminal history. David and the 2 bodyguards entered through the back door, as we'd planned. The bodyguards, introduced to me only as Mike and James, positioned themselves on either side of the dining room entrance, professional and intimidating in their dark suits. David took a seat to my right, close enough to offer support but far enough away to give me the psychological space I needed for what was about to happen. The 20 minutes passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour. I used the time to center myself, to push away any lingering traces of the woman who had loved Robert Sterling and replace her with someone harder, smarter, and completely done with being anyone's victim. When I heard Robert's key in the front door, my heart rate didn't even increase. I felt calm, focused, and coldly satisfied. "Jennifer," Robert called out, "where are you, darling?" "In the dining room," I replied, my voice steady and controlled. I heard his footsteps approaching, then stopping abruptly as he reached the doorway and saw the scene waiting for him. Me sitting calmly at the head of our dining table, David to my right, 2 obvious bodyguards flanking the entrance, and evidence of his crimes spread across the table like accusations. Robert's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate charm that I'd once found so attractive. Jennifer, what's all this? Who are these men? I don't understand what's happening. I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd shared a bed with, whose coffee preferences I knew, who had kissed me goodbye a week ago while planning to steal everything I owned. I felt absolutely nothing for him now. No anger, no hurt, just cold satisfaction that his time was up. Robert Caldwell, I said, using his real name for the first time, watching him flinch as if I'd struck him. Yes, I know your real name. You made one critical miscalculation. You underestimated me. His face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Robert Sterling, and I'm your husband. Jennifer, I think someone has been filling your head with lies. I picked up the first photograph, one of the fake documents I'd found in his desk, and placed it in front of him. I found these in your study a week ago. Multiple driver's licenses, fake passports, all with your photo and different names. Robert glanced at the photo, and I saw the exact moment he realized his carefully constructed world was collapsing. But he was a professional con man, and he tried one more angle. Those aren't mine, he said, reaching toward me with the same charming smile that had once made my heart race. Someone must have planted them there. Jennifer, you have to believe me. I love you. Do you? I asked, placing the surveillance photographs on the table one by one. Because these pictures show you with Patricia Whitman over the past week, your partner in crime, your real lover. Each photograph was a small detonation, destroying any remaining pretense between us. Robert staring at the images of himself and Patricia embracing, kissing, walking hand in hand while planning to steal my inheritance. And these, I continued, adding the forged financial documents to the growing pile of evidence, are power of attorney forms and bank transfer authorizations with my signature forged on them. Documents that would have given you complete control over my assets. Robert's mask finally slipped completely. The charming, loving husband disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. You can't prove I forged anything. Actually, I can. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, his complete criminal history. Robert Caldwell, age 38, originally from Detroit. Multiple arrests for fraud, identity theft, and marriage scams targeting wealthy women. At least 4 previous victims that investigators have been able to document. I watched him realize that his carefully constructed identity had been completely unraveled, that every lie had been exposed, that there was no way to charm or manipulate his way out of this situation. You've done this before, I continued, my voice never rising above conversational level. You find successful women with money, you gain their trust through fake marriage or relationships, you systematically steal their assets, and then you disappear. But this time you picked the wrong target. Robert's desperation was palpable now. He looked around the room, taking in David's protective presence, the bodyguard's professional readiness, and my complete lack of sympathy for his situation. I stood up, and Robert instinctively took a step backward. There was something in my expression that finally made him understand that Jennifer, the naive victim, was gone forever. Here's what's going to happen, Robert, I said, my voice carrying an authority I'd never felt before. In about 30 seconds, FBI agents who have been monitoring this entire conversation are going to come through that door. They're going to arrest you on federal charges of identity theft, marriage fraud, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and forgery. His eyes widened as he realized the full scope of the trap he'd walked into. Your marriage to me was based on fraud, so it will be annulled, I continued. You have no claim to any of my assets. The forged documents you created will be entered as evidence in your federal trial. And Patricia Whitman, your real partner, was arrested this morning when she tried to access one of the offshore accounts you'd set up using my stolen financial information. Robert's face crumpled as he understood that every avenue of escape had been blocked, every lie exposed, every scheme unraveled. Your own greed was your downfall, I told him. Your obvious pleasure at my extended trip gave federal investigators time to build an absolutely airtight case against both you and Patricia. You'll both be going to federal prison for a very long time." As if on cue, there was a sharp knock at the front door, followed by a voice calling out, "FBI, we have a warrant." Robert looked around the room one last time, perhaps hoping for some miracle escape, some last-minute reprieve. Instead, he saw David's protective presence, the bodyguard's professional readiness, and my complete lack of sympathy for his situation. The FBI agents entered, 4 of them, led by Agent Sarah Collins, who had been coordinating with Thomas throughout the investigation. They moved with practiced efficiency, and Robert offered no resistance as they formally arrested him. "Robert Caldwell," Agent Collins said, "you're under arrest for marriage fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and forgery of financial documents. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they led him toward the door, Robert turned back to me one last time. "Jennifer, I did care about you. That part wasn't all fake." I looked at him calmly. "No, Robert, you cared about my money. You cared about what I could give you. But you never cared about me as a person, because if you had, you never could have done this." The finality in my voice seemed to reach him, and he nodded slowly before the agents escorted him out of my house forever. Agent Collins approached me after her team had left with Robert. "Mrs. Matthews, I want you to know that Patricia Whitman has already been processed and is being held without bail. The evidence you helped us gather will ensure both she and Caldwell face significant federal prison time, likely 15 to 20 years each." "What about the other victims?" I asked. "The women he scammed before me?" "We're working with prosecutors in multiple states to bring additional charges related to those cases. Your cooperation has given us the breakthrough we needed to finally stop their operation permanently." After the agents left, the house felt strange and empty, but not in the lonely way it had felt after my parents died. This emptiness felt clean, like a space that had been cleared of something toxic and was ready for new growth. David dismissed the bodyguards with thanks, then turned to me. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question seriously. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in months, I feel completely free." "And now?" "Now I have some legal paperwork to handle, an annulment to finalize, and security measures to put in place to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." I paused, looking around my dining room where I'd just demolished the elaborate fraud that had threatened to destroy my life. "But first, I think I owe you an enormous thank you." David shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Jennifer. You handled that entire confrontation with more strength and control than I've ever seen anyone display." Robert Caldwell had no idea who he was really trying to manipulate. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," I said. "When I found those documents and didn't know who to trust, you were the first person I thought of. You've been my anchor through all of this." There was something in David's expression, a warmth and depth that I was finally allowing myself to see clearly. "Jennifer, I need you to know that whatever happens next, personally or professionally, I'm here. I've always been here, and I always will be." The weight of his words, the gentle certainty in his voice, made me realize that while I'd been married to a fraud, I'd been overlooking the most genuine person in my life. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the practical aspects of putting my life back together. Margaret handled the annulment proceedings with ruthless efficiency. Given that Robert's entire identity had been fabricated, the marriage was voided as if it had never existed. The forged financial documents were easily reversed, since none had actually been processed before his arrest. Thomas recommended a comprehensive security review of my home and financial accounts. I had new locks installed, updated all my passwords and account numbers, and established additional verification protocols for any future financial transactions. Most importantly, I hired Thomas's firm on a permanent basis to conduct background checks on anyone who might become a significant part of my personal life. I never want to be that vulnerable again, I told Thomas during our final meeting about the case. You won't be, he assured me. But Jennifer, I hope you don't let Robert's betrayal make you close yourself off from genuine relationships. Not everyone has ulterior motives. His words stayed with me as I began to notice how David had been quietly taking care of details I hadn't even thought about. He'd been managing our architectural firm single-handedly for weeks, handling client meetings and project deadlines without complaint. He'd coordinated with building contractors on my behalf when I needed new security systems installed. He'd even arranged for a cleaning service to come to my house after the FBI had finished processing it as a crime scene. But more than the practical support, David had been emotionally present in a way that never felt overwhelming or demanding. He checked on me daily, but gave me space to process what had happened. He listened when I needed to talk through my feelings about the betrayal, but never pushed for more emotional openness than I was ready to give. He was patient, consistent, and absolutely trustworthy. Everything Robert had pretended to be but never actually was. 3 weeks after Robert's arrest, David and I were working late in our office, reviewing the final plans for the Portland project that had inadvertently saved me from financial ruin. The irony wasn't lost on me that my decision to come home early from the convention, motivated by excitement about this professional opportunity, had been the key to discovering Robert's fraud before he could complete it. The sustainable housing complex is going to be beautiful, David said, pointing to the latest renderings on his computer screen. This partnership with William Harrison's firm is exactly the kind of work we've always talked about doing. I looked at the images of the proposed development. Affordable housing that incorporated cutting-edge environmental technologies with community spaces designed to bring neighbors together. It represented everything I'd wanted to achieve as an architect, buildings that didn't just house people, but created the foundation for healthy, connected communities. You know what I realized? I said, leaning back in my chair. This project represents everything authentic that Robert's fraud tried to destroy. Community, trust, building something real that will last. David saved the file and turned to face me. Speaking of building something real? There was something different in his tone, more serious than our usual professional discussions. I felt my pulse quicken slightly. Jennifer, I know the timing might not be ideal, given everything you've been through recently, but I can't keep pretending that my feelings for you are purely professional. I'd been expecting this conversation, but hearing the words still sent a flutter of nervous anticipation through me. David. Let me finish, he said gently. I've been in love with you since our second year of architectural school. I've watched you build this incredible career, navigate losing your parents, and now survive a betrayal that would have destroyed most people. Through all of it, I've tried to be the friend and partner you needed, even when I wanted to be more. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I'd seen thousands of times but was now noticing with new awareness. I know you need time to recover from what Robert did to you. I know you might not be ready to think about relationships or romance or anything beyond rebuilding your sense of security. But I also know that life is unpredictable, and I don't want to spend another decade wondering what might have happened if I'd been honest about how I feel. I looked at David, really looked at him, seeing not just my business partner and friend, but the man who had stayed late to help me with impossible projects, who remembered how I liked my coffee, who had dropped everything to help me when I was scared and didn't know who to trust, the man who had never asked for anything in return for years of quiet devotion. You want to know something? I said softly. The night I found those fake documents, when I was sitting in your living room terrified and confused, you were the only person I wanted to call. Not my attorney, not the police, not any of my other friends. You. Because somewhere deep down, I think I've always known that you're the person I can trust completely. David's eyes were warm and hopeful. And now, I stood up and walked around my desk to where he was sitting. Now I'm wondering how I could have been so blind to what was right in front of me all along. When I took his hands in mine, they were steady and warm, so different from the calculating touch I'd grown used to with Robert. David's hands were architect's hands, creative, careful, built for designing and building rather than destroying. "I'm not ready to rush into anything," I said honestly. "I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not being manipulated or lied to." "But David, I'd like to explore what we could build together, personally, not just professionally." "I've been waiting for you for over a decade," he said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I think I can be patient a little longer while we figure this out together." Our first kiss was gentle and tentative, nothing like the passionate declarations Robert had used to overwhelm my better judgment. This was a kiss that felt like a conversation, like a question and an answer, like the beginning of something built on the strongest possible foundation. When we broke apart, I rested my forehead against David's and laughed softly. "What's funny?" he asked. "I just realized that I've spent my entire career designing buildings, but I completely missed the most important architectural principle of all. Which is that the most beautiful structures are the ones built on solid foundations. Trust, friendship, genuine care for each other's well-being. Those are the materials that create something lasting." David's smile was radiant. "I think we've got excellent raw materials to work with." 6 months later, David and I were standing in the community center of our completed Portland housing project, watching families move into their new homes. The sustainable technologies were working perfectly, the community spaces were already fostering connections between neighbors, and the affordable housing was providing security for people who had been struggling to find safe, stable places to live. "We did good work here," David said, his arm around my waist as we watched children playing in the courtyard we'd designed specifically for them. "We always do good work together," I replied, leaning into his warmth. Our relationship had developed slowly and deliberately over those months, built on daily choices to be honest with each other, to support each other's dreams, and to create something authentic rather than something that just looked good on the surface. We'd had dinner together most evenings, taken long walks where we talked about everything from architectural theory to childhood memories, and gradually fallen into a rhythm of partnership that felt as natural as breathing. David had been patient with my occasional moments of doubt or anxiety, understanding that recovering from Robert's betrayal was a process rather than a single decision. I'd been surprised by how much I enjoyed the slow discovery of David's deeper thoughts and feelings, the private humor he'd hidden behind his professional demeanor, the dreams he'd kept to himself for years. Most importantly, we'd learned to see each other as complete individuals rather than missing pieces trying to fit together. David didn't need me to complete him, and I didn't need him to validate my worth. We chose to be together because we made each other's lives richer, not because we couldn't survive alone. "Jennifer," David said, turning to face me fully, "I have something I want to ask you." There was something in his voice that made my heart speed up, a tone I recognized from our most important professional conversations, but with an added warmth that was entirely personal. "We've been talking about expanding the firm, taking on larger projects that require more comprehensive partnerships," he continued. "But I'm realizing that the partnership I'm most interested in expanding isn't just professional." He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and I felt tears spring to my eyes as I understood what was happening. "Jennifer Matthews, you are the most remarkable person I've ever known. You're brilliant, compassionate, resilient, and absolutely beautiful inside and out. Would you consider making our partnership official in every sense of the word? Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire diamond that would complement rather than compete with my architectural work, elegant without being ostentatious. But more than the ring, it was the way David was looking at me, with complete openness and vulnerability, that made my heart overflow with love for this man who had been patiently building something real with me one day at a time. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." As David slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about Robert's fraudulent proposal, how different this moment was from that calculated manipulation. This proposal wasn't about what David could gain from me. It was about what we could build together, the life we could create based on mutual respect, authentic love, and shared dreams. Our kiss in that community center, surrounded by the homes we'd designed together and the families we'd helped house, felt like a perfect symbol of what our relationship had become, something beautiful, functional, and built to last. Later that evening, we sat on my back porch, our back porch now, planning our wedding and talking about the future. We'd decided on a small ceremony with just our closest friends and colleagues, something focused on the commitment we were making rather than external display. "You know what I love most about this?" I said, admiring the ring that caught the light from the porch lamps David had helped me install after the security upgrades. "What's that?" "It feels inevitable, but not in a scary way. Like we were always heading toward this moment, and now that we're here, I can't imagine any other outcome." David nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's what real love feels like, not like a lightning strike that changes everything instantly, but like coming home to something that was always meant to be yours." As we sat together in comfortable silence, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that night I discovered Robert's fake documents. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my ability to trust had actually cleared away the obstacles that had been preventing me from recognizing authentic love. I'd learned to distinguish between someone who claimed to love me and someone who actually did. I discovered that the strongest relationships aren't built on passionate declarations and dramatic gestures, but on daily choices to show up, tell the truth, and put the other person's well-being alongside your own. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful architecture isn't about the buildings we design for other people, it's about the life we construct for ourselves, built on foundations of trust, friendship, and the kind of love that grows stronger over time rather than burning out in spectacular fashion. Robert Caldwell and Patricia Whitman both accepted plea deals rather than face lengthy federal trials. They were each sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I heard about it through Margaret, who made sure I knew that justice had been served, but I felt surprisingly little satisfaction from their punishment. By the time they were sentenced, they had become irrelevant to my life, footnotes in a story that had moved on to much more important chapters. David and I were married the following spring in a ceremony held in the courtyard of our Portland housing project, surrounded by the families who lived there and the colleagues who had helped us create something meaningful together. My wedding dress was elegant but practical, something I could wear again rather than a costume for a single day. David's vows were thoughtful and specific, promises about the daily work of loving someone rather than generic declarations about forever. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, and David kissed me while our friends in the housing project residents cheered, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something authentic and lasting. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was the beginning of the real work of marriage, partnership, and creating a life together. But as David and I walked back down the aisle hand in hand, past the sustainable homes we'd designed and the community spaces where children were already playing, I knew we had everything we needed to build something beautiful, strong foundations, quality materials, and the patience to do the work right. After all, the most important lesson I'd learned was that love's true architecture isn't about the dramatic gestures or perfect moments. It's about the daily choice to build something together, one honest conversation and faithful action at a time. And with David, I was ready to spend the rest of my life perfecting that art. Thank you for watching our story. We hope it reminded you that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone new, but about finally seeing someone who was always there, waiting patiently for you to recognize what you had together all along. Thank you for listening until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please consider leaving us a like. This helps us reach more people.